And we're live in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Dying Breed Collectors. I am your host, Johnny Boy. Welcome, everybody. Exciting episode tonight. We're going to be doing a full spoiler review of Powers of X. Actually, it's Powers of 10. I'm going to tell you a little funny story about that title in a few minutes. But before I do, I know this video is a little late. The book came out on Wednesday. Today is Saturday, and it's pretty late, so most likely by the time you watch this, it'll be Sunday. But I wanted to get this video in tonight last minute for a couple of reasons. A, I shaved this morning, and I did my hair, so I look extra handsome. And 2, House of X number 2 comes out on Wednesday. It's already Sunday, so kind of got to get this in, got to get you caught up, and get ready for the next chapter. So, let's dive right into it. Powers of 10. Second part of the House of X Powers of 10 crossover, 12-issue series by Jonathan Hickman. This week, I picked up the split cover variant. So, there it is, issue 1, part 2 of the series. And it, of course, like I said, is a split, lines up. That's pretty fucking awesome. I'm definitely going to get a double frame and put these in. I can already tell, though, that they're not cut exactly perfect, which is one of the flaws of having split covers, is that, you know, there's going to be a little bit of Magneto's face missing, even if I press these up against each other perfectly. But it is what it is. I have the base cover on hold at my local comic store, but I moved this week. If you watched my last video, you know that. If you didn't watch my last video, pause this, go watch the last video, then come back, watch this one. In between, you should hit subscribe. That's what you should do. But I moved this week, so my whole library is in shambles. This is all I've got set up so far, just the Dragon Ball stuff. So for now, this is Dragon Wall Z. That's what I'm calling this. That's funny. Don't act like it isn't. So that's the state of the library. That's why the video's late. And let's start the review. So, Powers of 10. The book opens much like House of X did with a quote. This time it's a quote from Moira McTaggart. And it says, "It's not a dream if it's real." Okay, what the fuck does that mean? We'll find out. So, next page, it's 4 horizontal panels. And the first one is of a young Professor Xavier, and it's captioned X to the 0 power, the X-Men, Year 1, the Dream. That's what it says. Then in the second panel, it's like the current Professor Xavier that we're getting in this series, where he's got the helmet on of Cerebro, and it says X to the first power, the X-Men, Year 10, the world. Okay. Third panel, it's Nimrod, no more Professor X. It says X to the second power, the X-Men, Year 100, the war. What war? The fourth panel has a character that we later find out is called the Librarian. I don't know if that was known before this or not, but it's called the Librarian. He's a blue dude, and that is captioned X to the third power, the X-Men Year 1000 Ascension. So, what the fuck do these mean? Very cryptic. I don't know. So we continue. Turn the page, and it says Year 1. So we're starting in the first panel, like I said, with young Professor Xavier. We're getting that backstory. So it's got a young Professor Xavier at a carnival, walking around, just doing that in this comic series, pretty crazy. Looking at some things, he sees there's like a freak show, which they kind of focus on. I'll talk about that in a second. And then he sits down on a bench, and a woman comes up and starts talking to him. And she's talking about the carnival, and again, they talk about the freaks, and they focus on 3 different ones. One of them is a picture of a woman with a sword called the Magician. That's what she's captioned as. Then the second one is a tower, and it's called the Tower. I don't know what that means. And the third is a character that looks like a demon called Devil, I believe. I think I wrote it down. Yeah, he's called Devil. So it shows those. The woman's talking to Professor X, and she's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm finding what I'm looking for here, but then I saw you, and you're the man I've been looking for. You're this strong man. And he's like, I'm not that strong. I don't know what you're talking about. Before he can finish, she cuts in and she calls him Charles. And then he gets suspicious, and he's like, who are you? And she's like, read my mind and find out. And he does, and he's like, ah. And then it continues with her saying, it's not a dream if it's real, because he was telling her about how he was in such a good mood because he thinks he realized what his purpose in the world was, or his place in the world. I think it has something to do with the whole Krakoa thing and everything we found out in House of X. I think that's how it's connected, obviously. So that's what we get, and then you turn the page, and that's all we get of, we assume, Moira McTaggart. I think that makes sense, talking to Professor Xavier. So right away I'm like, well, okay, if this is Moira, is this the first time they're meeting? Is that what we're seeing? And when he read her mind, what did he see that he was like, like, does he know that he's supposed to know her? But how did she know he's Charles Xavier? I'm sure we're going to get answers to these questions later, but that's what I think, that's what I'm thinking. So from there, you turn the page, and it's like a white text page, and it's got a bunch of little things. I think this might even have like the credits, but something I noticed in the bottom right corner, it had some words that read, the world of Xavier and the woman named Moira. So I thought there's a lot to digest right there. The world of Xavier and the woman named Moira. So that's kind of depicting like this king, queen, god, goddess overruling of this world that I think is what Professor Xavier is trying to create in the House of X book that we read last week. So it seems like Moira McTaggart is going to play some gigantic role in this. Interesting. So from there we turn the page, and it picks up where we left off in House of X with Mystique and Toad, which would be year 10, X year 10, just to keep track of those 4 panels that I talked about in the beginning, like the timelines, because this is dealing with different timelines, obviously. So you see Mystique and Toad walking out of the portal, literally like right after she left Reed Richards and Cyclops and that whole, shade fest, and Magneto's there to greet her. And he's like, right away, he's like, do you have it? And she's like, yeah, we got it. And they're having a conversation about how Krakoa is having a good effect on even Magneto because it's giving everybody hope. And then Xavier shows up. He steps into a panel, and he wants the USB thing that Mystique has and the information. They're still not saying what it is. And she's saying, well, if I'm going to give it to you, I want a little more than we originally bargained for. And Xavier's like, well, that's interesting because we also want more than we originally talked about. So then it shows him plugging the USB. It looks like directly into Krakoa. It's kind of organically wrapping around his arm. He's plugging the USB in, and he's talking to Mystique, and he says, we're building a better mutant world, Mystique, and everyone who would live in it owes something. So I don't know what the fuck that means, man. It sounds like Professor Xavier is doing some like inhumane shit, to be honest. Like, everyone's gonna have to pay a price for this world. I don't know if that just means mutants. Probably means mutants and humans. If it does mean mutants, does that mean he's like tricking them? I don't know what's going on, but there's a lot to digest there. So that's pretty much all we get from that timeline that we were introduced to in House of X. From there, you turn the page, and it jumps to X to the second power, year 100, the mutant man-machine war. So it's a war between mutants and then man and machine. They're like partnered up, is what I took away from it. So it starts off with this mutant dying in the first panel, this like young looking kid who we later find out his name is Percival, I believe. And he's saying something, but at the end of it, he's saying that same quote that House of X opened with from Xavier that was like, while you slept, the world changed. And then it kind of pans out, and the next panel is these two machines standing over this dying mutant or dead mutant, probing it, and the one is telling the other that they can't get anything from the mind because all of a sudden they're doing this thing when they die that their memory starts getting erased. And then it kind of pans over, and there's another mutant that's seriously injured. It's crawling, and they're like, but this one is still alive, right? So they turn their attention towards that, and they reveal that they know who she is. The mutant's name is Silobel, I believe it's how it's pronounced, and she was born in Kennel. Not spelled the same way as like a dog kennel, but it's like Khenil, but it's called Kennel. I believe that's how it's pronounced. So you're like, the fuck is this place? Who's this woman? What year is it? I don't even know what's going on, right? So then from there, like a sentinel shows up, and they're like, they're about to fuck this Silobel's fucking day up. And then they show these two other mutants like watching from afar, observing. And the interesting thing about these two mutants is they're very reminiscent of those mutants that were at the freak show that Xavier and McTaggart were at like 2 pages before, right? Like, there's a chick with a sword. In the old timeline, it was like the magician is what she was called. Then they got this guy that looks like the devil, and he was like the devil, and you're like, oh, that's fucking interesting, right? So they're observing, and the girl is communicating with this Silobel telepathically, and she's like, I'm gonna rescue you, and the girl's like, no, like, you gotta get back, like, that is far more fucking important. And she turns to the devil guy, and she's like, that's true, like, we gotta get, like, whatever we came here to get, we gotta get it back, right? So she's like, you can leave, but I'm gonna go rescue her. So she fucking attacks, and like, awesome fucking panel. You like turn the page, and she's like, she's got that sword, right? And she's cutting that motherfucking one of those two machines like right in half. Like, fucks that fucker's day up. Then she like starts fucking sparring with the other fucking machine. And she's like, oh, we need some backup, and like the Sentinel starts getting involved, and she's like, run, sister, and all this shit. And the demon guy is like not helping with the attack, which we find out a little bit more about why later. So the Sentinel is attacking, and then they're able to capture the original girl they were trying to get, Silobel. And she's like, it's hopeless at this point. They got me. Like, you got to get away. And the girl's like, yeah, you're right. And in the meantime, the demon dude plants a seed that's to the dark part of Krakoa. And you're like, wait, what? Holy shit. This is like years later, but he's the Krakoa, and there's a fucking portal. Remember those portals from House of X? And so the chick with the sword and the devil dude leave the Silobel chick, and they hop in the portal, right? Let's see where that went next. So then you turn the page, and it's got one of those text pages, and there was like a shit ton to digest here. This is where things, I don't know, got really fucking interesting. It starts telling you about a mutant breeding program that was run by Mr. Sinister. Love Mr. Sinister, fucking glad he's involved here, because the mutant population at one point had hit a critical mass of like low, like they were not doing well. So remember, this is like, I think I've said it's different timelines a few times. It's not different timelines, it's like different time periods that they're showing. So somewhere between like year 10 and year 100, between like whatever's happening in the current time frame in Krakoa with House of X and this war that's going on between the mutants and the human machine alliance, the mutant population dwindled, right? So Mr. Sinister was like enlisted to start breeding mutants, and it had information on the different generations that he created. Now, the first generation was trained until they were 16 years old, and then they were sent to Krakoa, where they defended it for 30 years. And these first generation mutants were like, what's the word I'm looking for? They were given one X gene. Like, that's what they were implanted with. That's what I was looking for. They had one power, right? Now, the second generation that he creates, they're able to have two X genes, so two powers. There's like some cross, like, I don't know, an example, like Cyclops, like Optic Blast, and Gambit's kinetic shit. Like, you can do both of those things. Pretty fucking cool, Mr. Sinister doing some crazy crossbreeding, right? So then, the third generation he creates, they have 5 X genes, which is fucking insane, like a bunch of crazy fucking powers. But there's a higher percentage of like failures, which they're calling outliers, which they come back to in a second. And it was saying that this generation, this third generation with 5 powers, was like the most successful against the human and machine alliance, right? So then it talks about the fourth generation, and this is where things get fucked up. There's like a systematic failure because something about the hive mind that they used to create it was defective. So after this, 40% of the mutant population was destroyed. Like, this thing like fucked shit up. This led to the fall of Krakoa, and it was saying that all these mutants that were created, these fourth generations, like went into a mass suicide, and this is where shit like turned for the worst, right? It's a lot to take in. I had to reread this like 6 times. I've got these notes, so if you've read it, you understand what I'm saying. Like, it's a lot. I hope I'm doing a good job in keeping track of everything. It's a shit ton. So you turn the page, and it's like more text, and it's a DNA breakdown of the character that we were introduced to with the sword. We find out her name is Rasputin, and it's just showing a DNA breakdown. Like, it says Rasputin 4, 4th generation, I believe it's what that's implying. And, you know, she's got, like, the 5X gene. She's got all these fucking crazy powers. So they show that, they give a breakdown. Then, you turn the page, and it's even more text. It's, like, a lot of text in this one. And it explains who the outliers were that I was talking about before in the third generation, where there started to be like a higher percentage of failure. When they started introducing more X genes, apparently some of the mutant spread had more like pacifist powers, like stuff that wouldn't be useful in battle. So not only that, they started having like pacifist thoughts. So they weren't being bred for war, really. So they were like a waste. In addition to that, it explains that Mr. Sinister eventually betrayed the mutants. Big surprise. He had his own fucking agenda all along. So it starts saying that it's implying that he purposely caused that 4th generation of his own creation to go fucking ballistic, dwindle the mutant population. It also implies that he even previously had set up the population to dwindle in the first place to give the mutants the need to have him create all these fucking generations of breeded mutants. So it's really heavily implying that he's kind of had a hand in this all along. So I imagine we're going to find out when we jump back to our current time place in like House of X2. I think we're going to see some Mr. Sinister playing around or something. He's going to be doing something behind the scenes. That's what I think. Okay. It also goes to give a little interesting tidbit that after this whole collapse of Krakoa, he was like exiled, and he was eventually captured by the Human Machine Alliance, and publicly executed. Pretty fucked up, pretty fucking severe. Between that and like the fucking mass suicide and the population's dwindling, I'm like, this is some heavy shit. This is some crazy writing. So, from there, turn the page, finally back to some pictures, some fucking comic book, fucking art. I love the text shit, but a lot of it. So, it sets you up in a new place, but we're still in that that time period with the war, right? Where we had Silo Bell and all that shit happening. But now we're at the Tower of Nimrod the Lesser. So Nimrod, he was the character in the third panel in the beginning. And if you remember when I said Professor Xavier and McTaggart were at that fair and they showed the 3 mutants, freaks at the freak show, there was the Rasputin one, the magician, the chick with the sword. There was also the devil dude, whose name is Priest, we find out. I haven't mentioned that yet. And then the middle was that tower, and I was like, what the fuck is that tower? Well, all of a sudden, there's this Tower of Nimrod, the Lesser, and Nimrod's involved. So, it also shows that Omega Sentinel is there. So Omega Sentinel was in House of X, which is like 100 years before this, so she is apparently lives very long. Okay, so Omega Sentinel and Nimrod are interrogating and harassing this Silo Bell chick, and Nimrod is saying that he's so sorry that they created her because she was just created to betray her own kind, and it was very cruel, and you're like, what the fuck is he talking about? But basically, they're trying to get out of her, why were you and your friends, Rasputin and Percival, and who's dead, and the devil guy, what were you doing where we found you, and what information were you trying to extract and get back through that portal? And she's, typical hard-headed. She's like, I'm never going to tell you, I'm never going to betray my friends, all that shit. And they're like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do then. We're going to give you this thing called a bath, which Nimrod explains is they put the subject in this tube, with liquid of some type, a bath, and it essentially breaks them down. It breaks their physical being down and turns them into data, because Nimrod's a machine, which he can then extract for his own good. So, or for his own purpose, not good. Whew. So, that's what's going on there. Also, in the meantime, he calls her a hound, which we later find out what that is. So, you turn the page, and we're back to more text. A lot of text in this one. And we find out what the kennel is. Remember I said, originally when those machines found Silo Bell, they were like, she's from the kennel, we know who she is. So, the kennel was a Sentinel mutant breeding camp. So not only was Mr. Sinister breeding mutants to protect the mutants, humans and machines were breeding mutants to attack the mutants. So, what they were meant to do was gain the trust and sympathy of the mutants and then betray them in the name of the humans. So they were bred to betray their own side. Well, what ended up happening was they were so good at betrayal that they betrayed some of them, not all of them. Some of them end up betraying the humans and machines and joining the mutants, which would be the characters we were just introduced to, the Rasputin, the Priest, Silo Bell, and Percival. That's who they are. So they're hounds. They were created at the kennel. This is a lot to take in. There is a lot of shit going on here. So, from there, turn the page, jumps back to more artwork, more pictures. And it shows Rasputin and Priest coming out of that portal. Remember I said he created a portal to Krakoa. So they're coming out of there, and they're talking about how, like, he was sorry he couldn't do anything because he was bred, because he was one of those outliers that, didn't really have a power that was meant for war, and that's why he couldn't really jump in. Like, he doesn't have that about him. And she was saying, well, I wish you would have gotten captured instead of my sister. Talking shit, right? Then they get approached. They are actually greeted by 4 mutants: Magneto, Wolverine, some blue guy with a skull who I don't know who he is, and I believe Groot. Maybe not Groot, but some guy that looks like Groot who looks like a tree, right? And basically, it's mirroring what happened to Mystique in the beginning of the book when she walked out of the portal with Toad, and Magneto greeted her and was like, do you have the thing? And she had the USB, and then he gave it to Xavier. So, same kind of setup, except remember, this is like 100 years after that. So, Magneto's old as fuck, Wolverine's old as fuck, you can see gray in his beard, and they're like, do you have the stuff? So whatever they were getting from those machines, and they're like, yeah, we got it, but it came at a cost. And Wolverine's like, well, let's make sure it was worth it. So that's where we get left off from there. And then we turn the page. And, oh, wait, there was one more thing. Sorry. When Wolverine says, like, let's make sure it was worth it, he then follows it up with, oh, and the old man is waiting, who I assume is implying Xavier, right? So Xavier's waiting for them. You turn the page, more text. Oh my god, it's like a fucking novel in a comic book. So here, it's giving a breakdown of the surviving mutants. So it's saying that in this year 100, during the war or after the war, with humans and machines, there are less than 10,000 mutants still surviving. There are 2 colonies in the Shi'ar Empire. The first one is called Benevolence and has 8,000 mutants on it. The second is a place called Chandalar, which is the throne world of the Shi'ar Empire. There are less than 2,000 mutants here, and they are warrior stock to defend the throne. Okay? And of those 2,000, 6 are super guardians and 57 are sub guardians. I don't know, I'm imagining those 6 that are super guardians are pretty strong fucking mutants or something. So, then it gives a breakdown of the Sol system, SOL, which is apparently the solar system they're a part of. And it's saying that Empress Xandra plans to annex Asteroid K, which Asteroid K, I believe, is Krakoa. So Krakoa is no longer part of the world. It's a fucking asteroid 100 years after this war. Like, what the fuck happened? Okay? And then it goes on to say something that I think says more than maybe someone who's not looking into it, right? So follow me here. After there, it says that on Asteroid K, after the deaths of Silobel and Percival, who we were just introduced to, there are only 8 people on Asteroid K. So I thought about that for a second, and I was like, oh, there's 8 people. Rasputin and Priest, who just came out of the portal. The 4 people waiting for them, Magneto, Wolverine, the blue skull guy, and the Groot-looking guy. Wolverine said the old man is waiting. I believe that's Xavier, which brings us to 7. So if there's 8 people, I'm like, who is that 8th person? And I was like, shit. The person who's fucking by Xavier's side. Moira McTaggart. That's my theory, at least. Moira McTaggart is this 8th person on Asteroid K. But then I'm like, wait a minute. Remember, Magneto was saying humans are not allowed in Krakoa. Remember, he said that in House of X. So I'm like, man, if I'm right and it's McTaggart, like, what is her role in all this? What is she doing? Okay. So, from there, that's where it leaves off from year 100. And then we get our final time jump. And we're at x to the third power, year 1000. And it starts by showing Silobel in that bath that she was left off in year 100, and she's like very deteriorated. Then it gives you the caption of where it is, and it's the Archive of Nimrod the Greater Mutant Library. So, remember when we saw it in year 100, it was Nimrod the Lesser. Now in year 1000, it's Nimrod the Greater, and it's a mutant library. Okay? So then it shows that character called the Librarian that was introduced in that fourth panel way in the beginning of the book, right? Year 1000. So the Librarian is talking to Nimrod, and he's telling Nimrod how they're losing all the mutants. And like I think he's talking about Silobel, saying that he can't prevent them from breaking down any further. And Nimrod's like, I'm sorry, this is my fault. Like, I was never meant to last this long, something like that. And the Librarian's like, no, this is not your fault. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You created a collective consciousness of mutantdom to provide an advantage in war, okay? And then it goes on to say that, like, you didn't do anything wrong, because, or the Librarian's saying you didn't do anything wrong because there was a surprising end to the war. So you're like, as the reader, you're like, okay, somewhere between year 100 and year 1000, this war ended. Nimrod created a collective consciousness of all mutant kind. What the fuck is going on? Then it continues to say, the Librarian is saying that they got rid of Homo sapiens. And Nimrod, and by the way, Nimrod at this point is just this like floating piece of machine. He's not like a full body anymore. And Nimrod is like, well, I'm glad we're done with them. And then the Librarian is like, they pan out and he's overlooking this place called the Preserve. They give you the caption, tells you where it is. And he's saying how, are we ever really done with them? We have to preserve a piece of them to remember the sins of the past. And it starts like, the panel starts zooming in on the Preserve, and it shows that there's like a man and a woman in there, and it's the Librarian saying, like, it's important to preserve this memory and hope to God that they never rule the world again. And then it ends. That's the end of it. Whew. It's a lot to take in, man. So, when I read it the first time, I was like, what the fuck is going on? With House of X, reading it, they had that director's cut with the script, so when I was able to go back, that helped a lot. There was no script to this one, so I really had to go back and look for a lot of things and connections that you had to pick up on as a reader, and I think I found a few, like I said, with that little side note saying that this was Xavier and Moira's world. That seems like an important bit of information. That connection between those three freak show mutants in the beginning of the story having a very obvious connection to the mutants we see in year 100 with that war. And then I have a lot of like theories about the very end there with this Librarian and Nimrod overlooking, this Preserve, saying that, they don't want Homo sapiens to ever rule the world again. And so I'm thinking, like, is this, like, what's going on? Is this the end that Xavier foresaw when he seceded and created Krakoa? Is this like a Doctor Strange Infinity War, like 14 million, is this the only way, Tony? Fucking like, the only way for us to finally rid ourselves of humans is to go down this dark path with this like war, with this war 100 years from now, and in 1,000 years, mutants won't even exist, but neither will humans. Is that what's going on? Or are they showing us like, this is a possibility of what happens, and the, Mystique getting that information, and then Silobel getting that information and bringing it to Magneto, and then they're both apparently bringing it to Xavier. Are they trying to do something to prevent this from happening? Like, there is a lot going on that is yet to be revealed. Those are some of the connections and theories I've made. Please comment below. Let me know what you think. What are your theories? What do you think's going on? Because, man, I'm at a loss. I didn't think that this would be as good after House of X, because House of X was so phenomenal. That was one of the best single issues I've read in so long. I'm like, man, is there going to be a letdown? And there wasn't. Like I said, my first read through of Powers of 10, it was a lot to take in. Then I reread it, and I'm like, man, this is a intense, deep story. We're going to keep finding out layers and layers of information. So I'm going to keep reviewing. Of course, this upcoming Wednesday, House of X issue 2 comes out. I'm going to pick that up. Going to do a review the next day. We'll talk about that. I'm going to keep working on getting the library set back up. So once that happens, I'll do a room tour. That'll be a cool video. I can share all my shit with you guys. And like I said before, leave some comments below. Subscribe. Hit the like button. Let me know any videos you'd like to see me do that are related to geekdom and nerd culture. I'd love to do it. As always, thank you for your time. I'll see you next time. Johnny Boy out.